The text we're focusing on today is 6.3e to multiply and divide positive rational numbers fluently. And specifically, we're going to target multiplying decimals by decimals today. While we're doing the skill review this week, we really want to zero in on what it means to multiply and divide fractions and decimals. They behave differently than multiplying whole numbers, so I'll be referring back to this several times. This is page 106 in your math textbook, so please make sure you're there. We're going to start by showing a picture of what multiplying decimals looks like. This is 7/10 times 6/10, and if you shade in a grid, this picture is showing the actual product. But before we do that, let's talk about what 6/10 actually is. 6/10 is equivalent to 60 hundredths. So we have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So the reality is 60 hundredths would include this area up here. And 7/10 the same thing. 7/10 is the same as 70 hundredths. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. 70 hundredths actually includes this little area over here as well. So, as you can see, the actual product, because 7 times 6 is 42, the actual product of 42 hundredths is smaller in area than 60 hundredths and 70 hundredths. So the one thing I wanted you to focus on is how does decimals and fractions behave differently than multiplication problems. 6 times 7 is 42. 42 is greater than either factor, but 7/10 times 6/10 is 42 hundredths. 42 hundredths is actually less than either factor. So when you multiply by something smaller than 1, you end up with a smaller product, and that's something very important to understand. Okay, now the next thing we need to understand is the pattern. So you can see 7 times 6 is 42, but this 7/10 has 1 decimal place value. This 6/10 has 1 decimal place value. And as you can see, we have moved the decimal place 2. So we end up with 42 hundredths, and that's the pattern we need to remember. Here's another example, 8/10 times 9/10, and again, you'll see that 8/10 would include this white strip here, and 9/10 would include these two up the top. So 8 times 9 is 72, 1 decimal place value, 1 decimal place value. So we move it 2 decimal place values over. The result is 72 hundredths, which is less than either factor. So when you multiply by something smaller than 1, the product is smaller than the factors that were multiplied together. So that's that example is done for you. Let's go ahead and talk about this one. So we have 112 thousandths times 7 and 2/10. So we're going to multiply 112 by 2. Go ahead and do that for me. What is the partial product of 112 times 2? Answer that for me, please. Okay, so we're basically doubling 112, and for this, at this time, we're ignoring the decimals. 112 doubled is 224. Now, as you can see, they have moved 1 space over because we're moving 1 factor over. I always like to put a 0 there to hold the place value. Either way is fine. Now we're going to multiply 112 by 7. Go ahead and find that partial product, please. All right, you should have gotten 7,840 because we did add the 0 in the space that we moved over. The last step for multiplying 3-digit by 2-digit numbers is to add the two partial products together. I would like you to go ahead and do that for me, please. All right, when we add the two partial products, we get 8,064. And then as they've noted up here, there are 1, 2, 3 decimal place value places, and the second factor has 1. So we have to actually move the decimal, because our answer is not going to be 8,000. It's going to be something smaller than either one of the factors. So we're going to start out with the decimal here. 1, 2, 3, 4. The product is going to be 8,064 10,000ths. The next part of the notes talks about annexing zeros. So just like when we are dealing with fractions and division, we have to annex zeros sometimes when talking about decimals. So we have a situation in which we're multiplying 3/10 by 3/10. So we look for the pattern. 3 times 3 is 9. 1 place value, 1 place value. But here's where it gets interesting. So 3 times 3/10 equals 9. So there are 2 decimal place values. So you would do the 1, 2. But then you're left with a space here that has to be filled in by a 0. So that's what they're talking about. Annexing 0, we need to add a 0 when there is a space that's left blank. So if we have 2/10 times 4/10, we have 8/10, 2 decimal place values, 8/10 again. I'm sorry. Let's try that again. 2/10 times 4/10 equals 8, but then you do the 2 decimal place values, you're going to end up with a 0 here. And as you can see in the picture, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The actual 4/10 is this whole area right here. 2/10 is this whole area here. So the only part that overlaps those two arrays is 8/10, 800s, excuse me, which is way smaller than 2/10 and 4/10. 4/10 is like 4 dimes, 40 cents. 2/10 is like 2 dimes, and what you're left is a value of 8 pennies. So multiplying by something smaller than 1 will give you a product smaller than the factors. We're going to multiply 45 hundredths times 53 thousandths, which looks a little scary, but it really should be no scarier than multiplying 2 digits by 2 digits, 45 times 53. So ultimately, though, the first question they ask you here is how many decimal places will the product have? And we can go ahead and answer that because this first number has how many places after the decimal? Answer that for me, please. Very good. It has 2. And how many place value places are behind this decimal? So what is the sum of 2 and 3? All right, so ultimately we're going to move the decimal 5 places, but before we do that, we can just totally ignore decimals altogether and do the multiplication. The very first partial product is 3 times 45. Go ahead and solve that for me, please. Okay, 3 times 5 is 15. Carry the 1. 3 times 4 is 12. Plus 1 is 13. The first partial product is 135. Now we're going to do the second partial product, and I am going to go ahead and put the 0 there because we are moving over one factor, and anytime we move to the left, we're going to be increasing in value by a factor of 10. And 5, let's go ahead and I want you to solve that and tell me what the partial product is. Very good. 5 times 5 is 25, so we're going to put the 5 down, carry the 2. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 2 is 22. Carry that. And I don't know why I did that. I did that because there's something up here. 5 times 0 is 0 plus 2, so we actually could have just written 22 down here. So the next step is to add those two partial products. Go ahead and do that. 5 plus 0 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 plus nothing is 2. And so it looks like it's 2,385, but it's not, because remember, we have to move the decimal 5 places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in this case, we do have to annex 1 0, and we can go ahead and add a 0 in front of that just for good measure. Okay, we're going to finish up the notes by looking at the example number 5 on page 108. A certain car can travel 28 4/45 miles with 1 gallon of gasoline. The gasoline tank holds 11 5/10 gallons. How many miles can the car travel on a full tank of gas? Justify your answer. We're going to multiply those two numbers together. And basically it's a 4-digit times a 3-digit number. I will advise you to be very careful where you place these numbers, because place value matters. I think having space holders is very important. And of course, after the first factor, you're going to move 1 over. So there should be 1 0 in the second partial product and 2 zeros in the third partial product. Once you get all of those partial products done, you add them all up. They're going to be 2 decimal places in the first, 1 in the second. So that's why they have moved this decimal place over 3 spaces. Okay. All right. So thank you for taking good notes, and we'll be doing guided practice together in just a little bit.